Love is supposed to be built on trust, on something deeper than just money. At least, that's what I used to believe. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The way she looked at expensive things with a hunger in her eyes. The way she talked about wealth, about wanting more than just scraping by. But love makes you blind, doesn't it? One day, she was mine. The next, she was gone. She didn't leave quietly. No, she made sure I knew why. "You can't give me what I need," she had said, her voice sharp, final. "He can." He was a millionaire from Puerto Rico, a man with more money than I could ever dream of. She didn't even try to soften the blow, just packed her bags, got on a plane, and left me behind like a chapter she had finished reading. I told myself I'd move on, that I'd forget her. But some wounds don't close so easily. I tried to push her out of my mind, but months later I found myself scrolling through social media, looking for traces of her. That's when I saw the photo. She was standing in front of a massive estate, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my rent. Her smile was different, too wide, almost forced. And then there were the people behind her, dressed in all black, their faces blurred, standing in a formation that felt wrong. Something about that picture didn't sit right with me. That night I barely slept. My gut told me something wasn't right, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself that she had just moved on, a nagging feeling kept pulling me back. I needed to see her, needed to know the truth. The flight to Puerto Rico was uneventful, just a blur of airport terminals and impatient waiting. When I arrived, the heat wrapped around me like a thick blanket, the air heavy with the scent of salt and distant rain. The mansion was located on the outskirts of San Juan, far from the city, nestled near a dense jungle that seemed too eager to reclaim the land around it. The gates were open when I arrived. No security, no guards, just an eerie stillness. As I walked up the long driveway, the towering trees on either side made me feel like I was being swallowed by something ancient. Then I saw her. She was standing in the doorway, waiting, but she wasn't surprised to see me. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice unreadable. Her face was the same, but something in her eyes was different. It wasn't just indifference, it was detachment, like I was a stranger she barely recognized. "I need to talk to you," I said, stepping closer. "About what?" "About why you're here. About why you left." She smiled then, but it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was smaller, knowing. "Come inside." The air inside the mansion was thick, heavy with the scent of something burnt. The furniture was lavish, the kind you'd expect in a home like this. But it felt unused, like no one truly lived there. Then I noticed the candles. They lined the walls, flickering in an unseen breeze. Strange symbols had been carved into the wooden floors, their patterns intricate and chaotic. The deeper we walked into the house, the stronger the smell became. "What is this place?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just led me to a large, dimly lit room. And that's when I saw them. A group of people stood in a circle, all wearing black robes. Their faces were hidden beneath deep hoods, their hands clasped together. In the center of the circle was a large stone basin, filled with a thick, dark liquid that shimmered unnaturally. I took a step back. "What the hell is this?" She turned to me, tilting her head slightly, as if studying my reaction. "You don't understand yet." "Understand what?" "They showed me the truth." My stomach twisted. "Who?" Before she could answer, one of the figures in the circle raised their hand. The others followed, their movements eerily synchronized. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through my bones. Then the liquid in the basin began to move. Not ripple, move. It rose, stretching upward, forming shapes that shouldn't be possible. Faces flickered within it, distorted, agonized. I stepped back. "I don't know what the hell this is, but I'm leaving." She reached out, grabbing my wrist. Her grip was ice cold. "You can't." I yanked my arm free and turned toward the door. But the hallway was different now. The walls seemed to stretch endlessly, the light from the candles dimming. Something whispered my name. I spun around. The figures in the circle were facing me now, their hoods still concealing their faces. But their presence felt heavier, suffocating. "Stay," my wife said. Her voice wasn't hers anymore. It was layered, like multiple people speaking at once. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going, just needed to get out. The hall twisted and turned, the walls seeming to close in. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning as I pushed forward. Then I saw it. The front door. I lunged for it, yanking it open. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt something pulling at me, like unseen hands clawing at my skin. My vision blurred, my ears filled with a deafening roar. And then I was outside. The air was thick, humid. The mansion behind me was silent, dark, as if nothing had ever happened inside. My hands were shaking, my body drenched in sweat. I stumbled down the driveway, my head pounding. I don't remember getting back to my hotel, don't remember booking a flight home. But the next thing I knew, I was waking up in my own bed, thousands of miles away. I told myself it was a nightmare, that I imagined it. But every time I close my eyes, I see those faces. And sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I hear them whisper my name. Work trips are supposed to be predictable. You get on a plane, attend a few meetings, shake a few hands, pretend to care about things that barely matter, and then come back home with a slightly heavier inbox. It's all routine. At least that's how it used to be. Then came Puerto Rico. My boss, Richard, was the type of man who never disappeared. He was punctual, methodical, the kind of guy who answered emails at 3 a.m. just to show he was still in control. He wasn't the kind to go missing for 2 days with no warning. But that's exactly what happened. He had flown to Puerto Rico for a conference, a simple business trip. He was scheduled to return in 3 days, but on the second day, he vanished. No calls, no texts. His hotel reported that he hadn't checked out. His phone went straight to voicemail. He wasn't in any hospital or police station. It was like he had stepped off the face of the earth. Then on the 4th day, he came back. But he wasn't the same. I remember the first time I saw him after he returned. He was sitting in his office, staring out the window, unmoving. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled, things I had never seen before. Richard was always pristine, always composed. But now, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I knocked on his door, but he didn't react, didn't even blink. "Richard?" I said cautiously, stepping inside. "Where the hell have you been?" Slowly he turned his head toward me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear in his eyes. Not confusion, not exhaustion, fear. "I don't know," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. I frowned. "What do you mean you don't know?" He swallowed hard, his fingers twitching against the armrest of his chair. "I left the hotel to get some air. That's all I remember." I stared at him. That was 2 days ago. His breathing grew uneven. "I know." Silence stretched between us. The air felt heavy, suffocating. I wasn't sure what to say, but every instinct in me told me that something was very, very wrong. "I woke up in a place I didn't recognize," he finally said. A house, I think. But it was empty. Just me. No furniture, no lights, nothing." His voice cracked slightly. "The windows were wrong. I could see outside, but it wasn't real." A chill crept up my spine. "What do you mean?" He shook his head. The sky wasn't moving. The trees didn't sway. It was like everything was frozen, but I could hear them. "Hear who?" He turned back toward the window, his reflection warped against the glass. They were whispering. The room felt colder. "Richard," I said carefully, "what are you talking about?" He exhaled shakily. I don't know," he repeated, rubbing his temples. "I don't remember leaving. I don't remember how I got back. He stopped, his entire body tensing. Then he leaned in close, lowering his voice to barely a breath. "They're still watching me." I wanted to tell him he was just exhausted, that he needed rest, therapy, something. But the way he was looking at me, his pupils dilated, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as if holding on to reality itself, I knew this wasn't just exhaustion. This was something else. I glanced around his office. "Did you tell anyone else?" He let out a hollow chuckle. Who the hell would believe me? I didn't have an answer for that. For the next few days, I kept an eye on him. I expected things to get better. Maybe with time, he'd snap out of it. Maybe he just needed a break. But it didn't get better. It got worse. He stopped sleeping. I'd walk past his office late at night, and he'd still be there, sitting in the dark. His emails became erratic. Half-written sentences, messages sent with no context. Then came the drawings. I found them scattered across his desk one evening. Pages and pages filled with frantic scribbles, circles, symbols, shapes that didn't make sense. And in the center of each one was the same image, a window. I asked him about it the next morning. He didn't answer me, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. I didn't press. Then one night, I woke up to my phone ringing. It was him. When I answered, all I heard was heavy breathing. "Richard," I said, sitting up in bed. He didn't respond at first. Then, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard him use, he said, "I can see them now." The call cut off. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Richard didn't come to work. He didn't answer his phone. 2 days later, I got the news. He had quit, effective immediately. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. Nobody heard from him after that. No social media, no emails. His apartment was emptied out, as if he had never lived there in the first place. And yet, sometimes late at night, I get the feeling that he isn't really gone, that he's still out there, looking through a window that isn't quite real, and that maybe, just maybe, something is looking back. Some cases linger in your mind long after you've closed the file. This was one of them. I had been sent to Puerto Rico to investigate a missing persons case, a local fisherman who had vanished under strange circumstances. His family swore he had been taken by something unnatural. The official reports, of course, dismissed those claims. But I had seen enough in my career to know better. The village where he had lived was small, tucked away near the coast. The people were wary of strangers, their eyes holding secrets they refused to share. But they did tell me one thing: don't go near the cave. Naturally, I did. The entrance was nearly hidden by thick vegetation, but I found it. A heavy silence filled the space as I stepped inside, my flashlight barely piercing the darkness. The deeper I went, the more unnatural the air became, thick, almost liquid, as if something unseen was pressing against me. Then I heard it, a whisper, just barely audible, calling my name. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I kept moving forward. And then I saw him, or at least I thought I did. His figure stood at the far end of the cave, his back turned to me. His clothes were tattered, his skin pale and almost translucent. Relief flooded me as I called out, but the moment the words left my mouth, he moved, too quickly, spinning around in a way no human should. His eyes were gone, just hollow gaping sockets, his mouth twisted into a shape that wasn't meant for smiling. Then he spoke. "You shouldn't be here." The cave walls trembled, the air grew heavier, suffocating, and then the shadows moved. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the beach, the sky dark. The cave entrance was gone, sealed as if it had never existed. I left Puerto Rico the next day. The case remained unsolved, but I knew the truth. Some places don't want to be found. There are moments in life that change you forever. Moments that shatter the way you see the world, that force you to question everything you thought was real. I used to believe in logic, in reason, in things that could be explained. Then I went to Puerto Rico with my son, and I came back with someone who wasn't him. The trip was supposed to be simple, just a small vacation, some sun, some beaches, and time away from the stress of work. My son had never traveled outside the country before, so I thought this would be a great experience for him. He was 13, just old enough to be curious about the world, but still young enough to find excitement in the little things. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. We checked into a small but comfortable hotel near San Juan, spent the first few days exploring, eating local food, and soaking in the culture. My son was happier than I had seen him in a long time. Then, on the fourth day, we visited Yunque, a massive rainforest known for its waterfalls and breathtaking views. That's where everything changed. It started with a trail. A guide had told us about a hidden path, one that wasn't on most tourist maps. It was supposed to lead to a beautiful, secluded waterfall. I should have known better, but my son wanted to go. "Come on, Dad," he said, excitement in his voice. "What's the point of an adventure if we don't go off the map?" I hesitated. Something about the way the guide had mentioned the trail felt off. He had spoken quickly, almost like he regretted telling us about it. His words stuck with me. "Some places in the rainforest don't want to be found." I shook it off. It was just a local legend, nothing to be afraid of. We followed the trail deep into the trees, stepping over tangled roots and damp earth. The air smelled thick, humid, alive. It was beautiful, sunlight filtering through the canopy, the sound of distant water. But as we walked, the forest became unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, just silence. My son walked ahead of me, eager to reach the waterfall, but then he stopped. "There's something up there," he said, pointing ahead. I followed his gaze. At first I didn't see anything, just trees and vines. But then as my eyes adjusted, I saw it, an old stone archway, half covered in moss. It looked ancient, like it had been there for centuries. Carvings covered the surface, symbols I didn't recognize. The air felt wrong here, heavy. "We should turn back," I said, my stomach twisting. But my son wasn't listening. He was staring at the archway, his eyes wide. "It's calling me," he whispered. I grabbed his arm. "What are you talking about?" He blinked, as if waking from a trance. I don't know." He shook his head. "Let's just go." We turned around, but the way back wasn't the same. The trees seemed closer together, the path narrower. I could have sworn we had walked in a straight line, but now the trail twisted in ways I didn't remember. Every step felt wrong, like the forest was shifting around us. Then my son gasped. I turned to him. His face had gone pale. "Dad," he whispered, "someone's behind us." I spun around. There was no one there, just trees. "Come on," I said, gripping his hand. "We need to move." We walked faster. Then we ran. The trees blurred past us, the thick air burning my lungs. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears. Then suddenly, we were back, Just like that, the trail was normal again. The sounds of the rainforest returned. The birds, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of insects. The hotel was only a short walk away. But my son was different. At first it was small things. He barely spoke that evening, just sat by the window, staring outside. His appetite was gone. He didn't complain about being tired, didn't ask to watch TV before bed. Things he normally did without fail. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just shaken up. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. It was coming from my son's room. Slowly I pushed the door open. He was sitting on the bed, his back to me, whispering in a low, urgent tone. His posture was rigid, his hands gripping the sheets. "Buddy," I said. He stopped. The room fell into an eerie silence. Then he turned his head. Too far. His neck twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes locked onto mine. His face was completely blank, expressionless. "Go back to sleep, Dad," he said. But his voice wasn't his. It was deeper, layered, like two voices speaking at once. A shiver ran down my spine. "What's wrong with you?" He smiled. Not my son's smile. Something else's. I took a step back. "We're leaving first thing in the morning." He didn't react, just turned his head slowly back to the window. I barely slept. Every few minutes I checked his room, half expecting him to be standing by my bed, staring at me in the dark. But he never moved. He just sat there, watching the night. At dawn, I packed our bags. I didn't care about the rest of the trip. I just wanted to get home. On the flight back, he barely spoke, didn't eat, didn't react to anything. It wasn't until we got home that the real nightmare began. At night I heard him talking to something. Sometimes I'd wake up and find him standing in the hallway, facing the wall, whispering. His voice would shift, sometimes deep, sometimes shrill, like 100 different people were speaking through him. I called doctors, psychologists. They all said the same thing. Stress, trauma, nothing supernatural. But they didn't live with him. They didn't hear the things I heard. Then one night I woke up to my bedroom door creaking open. I reached for the lamp, but before I could turn it on, I heard his voice. "Dad." I froze. Then I heard the whisper, the one that didn't belong to him. "He's not yours anymore." I turned the light on, but he was gone. I ran to his room. The bed was empty. The window was open. I searched the house, the yard, the street, but he was nowhere. The police never found him. No traces, no signs, just gone. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the wind is still and the shadows grow long, I hear his voice, calling from the dark, begging for help. And I still literally mourn every day for him. And I hope one day he will come back to me and hug me like a little baby.